Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations episode number 51. I'm your host, Joe Hannon, the scruffy-ass dude from New Jersey who needs a haircut and a beard trim. So, truth be told, I recorded this episode yesterday, and then I went to initiate production, and I realized that the entire episode, the audio had been recorded by my iPhone instead of this Shure microphone that I'm speaking into right now. So I'm doing it over again, and I'm doing it over again after a night of very intense training, very sore, very tired. So it could be a completely different feel to this episode than originally had been intended, but that's the nature of this show. It's always been intended to be natural, spontaneous. I do have notes in front of me of topics I want to cover, but I'm always speaking extemporaneously here. It's part of my training. When Emily Kwok challenged me to start this podcast almost a year ago, she did so with the intention of prompting me to be a bit more spontaneous, to show who I am in a less guarded fashion. So that's what this is all about. So putting all my fuck-ups right out there, right up front. I messed up yesterday and recorded this incorrectly, and I have to do it again. There are consequences for our failures, right? Speaking of consequences for failures, I failed in Miami, or did I? Haha. Either win or you learn, right? It's one of those really annoying cliches that has truth at the heart of it, but when you put it on Instagram, it's immediately a massive douche signal. Sorry, I'm going to be cursing a lot more than usual here. I try to always put the explicit warning on these things when I do curse. Today is going to be most likely one you don't want to listen to with your kids in the car, just because I'm tired. So the filter is slightly diminished. I'm hitting some Double D's cold brew here, Dunkin' Donuts for the uninitiated. To try and get through the episode. Usually I keep it to 1 cup of coffee in the morning, but that ain't going to cut it today. So Miami Open. What happened? That's what this episode's going to be all about. First, I'll just tell you what happened to not be anticlimactic, and then I'll unpack it a little bit thematically so you can see how I think about these things and perhaps use a similar framework for yourself, or perhaps not. I don't know what you're trying to get from this podcast. You're here listening. You tell me. I get very little feedback from you people in terms of what lands and what doesn't. But, the listenership grows bit by bit. So I guess I'm doing something right. But I would love to hear from you is what I'm trying to say. Please write me bjjmeditations@gmail.com. Anyhow, so Miami. It was a 4-man bracket. I lost my first match. I think I overcompensated for my performance at Worlds, where I really let my opponent set up his game, and then I was on my heels, essentially, dealing with what he wanted me to do. And I tried to flip the script this time, and I went too far in the wrong direction. I was too hasty. Pulled guard, immediately tried to pull into single leg X, and with single leg X, you have that foot, in this case is my left foot, on the hip. My opponent sensed this and immediately sat to a toe hold, which is unusual. Most people will attack with an ankle lock there. Got like 80% of the way past his guard and went to sort of like a knee on chest position, not with the back leg, which is the leg that would score you points, but more with the front leg. I love to use that to sort of open people up. And he underhooked that leg that was on his chest and rolled, and I lost my balance. Ordinarily isn't something that I think would cause me to look to lose my footage. I've watched the sequence over and over and over again, and had I not lost my balance, I think it would have been a totally different story. I would have been up 5-0 instead of on my ass defending another toe hold attack. But I lost my balance and fell, and he immediately reinitiated the same attack, and this time he was successful. So, traveled all that way to fight for essentially a minute, lost to just a gentlemanly competitor, Brazilian guy, spoke very little English. On our way to the mat, he turned to me and he just said, "Good fight." And I, looked me in the eyes. Clearly, it was a man who has done this many times before. He was the number 1 seed in our bracket. I looked at his points total. The guy has over 200 points on his black belt alone. 3rd degree black belt. He's been training He's been a black belt for 10 years. I've been a jiu-jitsu grappler for 9 years, and I've had my black belt for less than a year. Number 2 seed in the bracket had 100 points on his black belt, also 3rd degree. And then the 3 seed had 10 and I had 0. But now I have 2. So that should help me perhaps when I'm in New York. But yeah, he hit me with that toe hold, immediately asked me if I was okay. I was. And then I watched him essentially do the same exact thing to the number 2 seed in the gold medal match. There was some sort of scoring kerfuffle. I didn't really catch what had happened, but the guy who beat me ended up winning the bracket by an advantage, which, you know, you never really want to win by an advantage, but a win is a win is a win, and this guy won, and he certainly deserved it. So yeah, that's what happened in terms of being outcome oriented. Now I want to talk a little bit about my thought process, what went on in my head, and perhaps what might be useful to you as you approach competition. And I'll say this too. I lost and over lunch signed up for a local competition to get some more reps in and signed up for the New York Open, which is going to be the first weekend in April. So right back in the saddle. And the beautiful thing about competition is, and the reason why I think everybody should do it if they feel so inclined, is that it's a learning opportunity unlike any other. For example, in our gym, we're pretty emphatic about, you know, position before submission. I don't want to see, especially if you're a blue belt, even a purple belt, I don't really want to see you forming the habit of abandoning good positions to attack. But of course, there are exceptions to that, and you can start playing in that exceptional zone once you achieve a baseline of mastery like this guy did. He broke the rules because he was so confident in his leg attack, and he sensed that I was doing something that he could exploit with it. So kudos to him, but that's not necessarily a habit you want to start forming early in your development. So therefore, most people in our school don't play like that. That leaves a big gap in my game that this guy was able to exploit. But had I just continued to like train with the same dozen or so people that I train with on a normal basis in my gym, that never would have been revealed to me. It would have been something that I just kept doing, and it never would have been made apparent, and it would be a vulnerability in my game that I never closed. But now I know it's there. I already worked on it last night with our head coach, and hopefully I won't make that mistake again. We'll see. I'm only human. But yeah, get out there, compete. You know, it's scary. I don't mean to diminish the fear and the trepidation that surrounds it, but we can overcome that, and that's kind of what I'm hoping to get to today. So what I wanted to do leading up to this competition was just to get really clear on what my goals were. And I had this great session with my therapist the day before I was leaving, and he asked me, like, I was talking about all the negative emotions that are associated with competition. And he asked me, why do you keep doing this? And I gave him my reasons, which I'll explore in this thing I'm about to read to you. But he came up with the suggestion of setting some goals, which is kind of a no-brainer. But what sort of opened up my perspective a bit was he asked, like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, you know, well, I want to win, of course. That's the obvious thing. But, you know, the problem with that, and he made this point, is that that's very much outside of your control. Jiu-jitsu is a game of incomplete information. It's very much like chess. Like, I don't know what strategies, tactics my opponent is going to be employing. I could play at my A game. I can do everything extremely well. But if my opponent has a better strategy or better tactics, then I'm going to lose. So I broke this down into things that were within my control, goals that are very much within my control, and then sort of things that would be nice to achieve. So here's, I wanted to get clear on this for like a week before the match. Of course, I didn't have time with that because my son is 2 and I'm married and have all the responsibilities that come with it. So I ended up writing this on my packing list in my notes file on my phone on the flight. So it doesn't have a title or anything. I'll read it to you, and then I'll go through it bit by bit and kind of explain my thinking. I do this because it is difficult. I do this because it requires courage. I do this because it helps me grow and learn. I do it to show Cormac the way. I do this to walk the path for myself and to show the students how to walk the path. What can I do better this time? Something specific and something that I can control. I choose to be here for it all. I choose not to give in. I choose to hunt. What's a good goal, but admittedly one I can't control? What would be an improvement over last performance? I want to put points on the board. I seek no assurances inside or outside of myself. I do this alone, same as always. The fact is that you have to take a lot of losses to get better. The fact is that victory is still sweet and defeat is still bitter. Senses are what they are, but they move. They are transitory, flowing. My opponent and I are the same sides of a single coin. There is no enemy without a friend. There is no victory without defeat. How few of us can truly be great? Does that mean we stop striving? We can all be great strivers. We can all embody that quality. So these questions or these answers at the beginning, these affirmations, I do this because, this is kind of direct response to my therapist when he asked me these questions. I do it because it's hard and because it requires courage. How few things in life outside of jiu-jitsu, if you listen to this podcast, I'm presuming you do jiu-jitsu, truly require us to build that muscle of courage. And to me, courage is being present to all the negative emotions associated with the thing and doing the thing anyway. Jiu-jitsu trains us to do that reflexively. You get habituated to the stress, the anxiety, the physical pain, the exhaustion of training. Every time you step on the mat, you get a little bit stronger. But many of us sort of get inured to that, right? It becomes normal. It becomes a habit, something we do. Competing pushes it a little bit farther. It asks a little bit more of you. It further develops that muscle of courage that it otherwise wouldn't. And of course, that's how we grow and learn. Like I said at the top of the episode, you're going to have things revealed to you in a match in the course of 5 minutes that might take 5 months, 5 years to become salient to you. It expedites the learning process. And, of course, we're out there to win. That's what I want more than anything. I would love to win an IBJJF gold medal. So far, I have just a few bronzes. This most recent one was the thanks for playing bronze. I don't even count it. I might give it to Cormac to play with if he wants it. Of course, I want that gold medal. I would love a silver medal, for God's sake. But I also want to learn. And that's what this is all about to me. I do it to show Cormac the way. Yeah, this is a big shift for me since becoming a father. And also since becoming a partner or part owner of the school. I sit here and I extol the virtues of competing as a means for growth and an expedient means for growth. It would be pretty fucking hypocritical of me if I didn't walk that path, especially for my son. I have to strive constantly to eliminate as much hypocrisy from my life as possible because there's his inquisitive set of eyes and ears on me at all times. And that's my most important job right now is dada. And dada can't be a hypocrite. Of course, hypocrisy is sort of part of the human condition and it's going to be a part of me. You can't completely eliminate it, but I have to be about the work of eliminating it. And I have to embody the qualities that I want him to embody. Otherwise, it's just totally hollow. Same thing goes for my students. Like, it was really fucking hard for me to come back to competing after becoming a dad for totally illogical reasons. Well, perhaps not illogical, but for me anyway, I'm far more aware of my own mortality than I ever have been since becoming a dad. I felt this acutely when I got married, and then it just, the volume got turned up even farther when Cormac was born. And it's a fight when you're out there. It's certainly, hopefully not life or death, but your body doesn't really know the difference. And yeah, there's a strong impulse to get out of that situation, to take care of your family. And, it's hard to overcome. And I feel that for any of you who are sitting out there listening to this and who are on the fence about competing, especially if you're a bit older, especially if you have a family. But I'm here to tell you that there's a beautiful feeling of liberation on the other side of that, and also a beautiful feeling of growth. And I certainly want my son to understand that. I want my students to understand that. And the only way I can help them understand that is to fucking do it. So I walk that path. I do it for them as much as I do it for myself. So then we get into, what can I do better this time? And I think this is, if there's a takeaway in this episode for you to put into practice, it's this. What is truly inside of your control if you're approaching this competition for the first time, or approaching competition period? It's a game of incomplete information. I don't know what my opponent's going to do. I don't know how they've prepared. They might have better coaching than me. They might just have better luck than me. Like I said at the top of the podcast, it could have been a totally different story, for example, if I didn't fall when he underhooked my leg. I wouldn't even call it a sweep, because it wasn't really so much a sweep attempt as it was just another initiation of that attack. I would have been up 5-0 in a dominant position of north-south or side control, which I know I can hold for a long time, and where I have some really high percentage submissions that I have dialed in. So, I don't know what would have happened. It's kind of useless to say, I suppose. But none of that was inside of my control. What was? It was largely things that were internal, and as I mentioned in an earlier episode, presence was a big part of it. And that's what I mean when I say I choose to be here for it all. And a lot of that comes from Jeff Trainer, training partner, student at the school. He sent me a message earlier in the week before I left for Miami. And he said something to the effect of, I hope you can be present for it all. And that was my chief goal. I just wanted to be pores open to the entire experience, even more so than I was at Masters, just to really feel every emotion, every sensation associated with it, regardless of the valence. So regardless of whether it was negative or positive. And that was something that was within my control. I could do that. Instead of trying to push these things away, I could welcome them in. So there was that. Choosing not to give in. This came from watching a bunch of our students perform beautifully at a local competition. And specifically, I watched my friend Mehdi grapple with a blue belt, and he beat this guy. A lot in both of his matches. But in his second match, he passed his guard and put him in side control. And immediately I just saw like the life go out of this guy. And we've all been there, right? I've certainly been there in competition. I've been there on the mats during normal training. You're tired and you get into that disadvantageous position. Like you're on the bottom of mount or you're on the bottom of side control. And it's like your soul leaves your body, and that's not hyperbole. The spirit literally goes out of you. But you can choose to retain it, and you can choose to dig deeper and put up a fight. And you can choose that regardless of the outcome. If you're the prey in this case, you can choose to go limp in the lion's jaws, or you can choose to fight back. You might not win. The lion's a pretty formidable adversary, but you can make that decision. So I chose to make that decision. It never really came to that. When the toe hold was on, the toe hold was on. I'm not going to let this guy break my ankle or tear up my knee, for sure. It's not worth it. It's not mundials or anything like that. But I was fully prepared to fight out of difficult positions should the moment arise. It did not. Choosing to hunt, inspired by the hunt of my lifetime, which I talked about in that podcast from last year called The Hunt. There was, in the woods that night, something really deep inside of me was pulling me further, was telling me that deer was out there for me. I just had to look for it. I had to have the courage to go and get it. And that was sort of my message too from Worlds. I had to have the courage and the conviction to take the initiative, to go and get. And ultimately, that's why I was playing defense in that match. I lacked that conviction. But I will say I overcorrected this time. This is something Emily and Shane and I talked about in the post-mortem on this match. Whereas on that hunt, I was receiving sort of what all the signals that the woods were sending me. In that match, I was not receiving what my opponent was sending me. He was not in a hurry. I should have worked with that energy, should have taken my time on the guard pull, and I should have just been present to all of that, be receptive to all that. So lesson learned. We'll work on that the next time. So then we get into goals that can't be controlled. This is sort of like the nice to have, icing on the cake stuff. And for me, it was putting points on the board. Something simple but outside of my control. And hey, I achieved that goal, but whether I achieved it or my opponent achieved it is kind of debatable. I would say my opponent achieved it. He conceded the sweep to attack. Tactical decision on his part. It's not like I achieved those points, but I suppose, I didn't get what I wanted, but I got what I needed. I got my 2 points. That'll help me in the next competition in terms of where I get seated if there are a bunch of other novices in the bracket, novice competitors. So the last 3 or 4 sections of this little note to myself are more of the affirmation variety. And, I think that there's like a lot of woo-woo crunchy bullshit associated with affirmations, but I think they can still be useful as long as we're not kidding ourselves, as long as we're not sort of living in delusion. And that's where sort of the ecology of practices surrounding your jiu-jitsu can come in handy, whether that's meditation or journaling or whatever speaks to you. We can talk more about that one-on-one if you're interested. It's important not to kid ourselves. And it's important to and I think this is kind of where Stoicism, internalizing Socrates, can be helpful, is you can sort of have that asker, that interlocutor, kind of like checking you before you wreck yourself. So I put these out there with a high degree of skepticism, but I also knew that they were what I needed in the moment. So, I seek no assurances inside or outside of myself. I do this alone, same as always. Ultimately, it's you out there on the mat. No one's going to fight the fight for you. You might have a coach in your corner. You might not. You might have 10 years of experience at your belt level. You might have less than a year of experience at your belt level. None of that matters when the opponent says, or when the referee says combate. It's on. It's just you, and it's just the other guy or gal, and you got to sort it out for yourself. And that's scary, but it's also beautiful. I've played a lot of team sports in my lifetime, and the beauty of a team sport, obviously, is that when you are not at your best, hopefully somebody on your team is and can buoy you up a little bit. But that's just not really the case in combat sports. It falls to you. All the preparation, you can do that together with your coach, but ultimately it's just you out there. And that can either be frightening or empowering, depending on how you relate to it. The fact is that you have to take a lot of losses to get better. It's true. I do some work for Fred Wadeskin, the author of Searching for Bobby Fischer, and just being an observer of Josh's career in chess and in the martial arts. He said this to me after I took a loss at the New York Open, and he said, Josh always says that we learn more from our defeats than we do from our victories. And when the wound is raw, that does very little to console you, but over the long term, it's been very important for me to remember. And it's important for me to remember up to the point of stepping on the mat. Speaking of emotional rawness, when I talk about the sweetness of victory and the bitterness of defeat, what I'm talking about is the transitory nature of these and all human experiences. There's this beautiful line from the very end of the movie Patton where he's talking about the Roman triumph and how, the Roman emperor, when given a triumph, would have a slave in the chariot riding behind him beside him saying, all glory is fleeting. That was sort of like a poetic flourish. What the slave would actually say in that situation was, thou art man. And it would be because the emperor would be wearing a purple cloak, purple being a color of divinity reserved for rare occasions in the history of the Roman Empire. But I like that poetic flourish. I think it's sort of like a very refreshing take on the same concept. All glory is fleeting. Thou art man. All human glory is fleeting. It's all transitory. All human negativity is fleeting. All human emotion and experience is fleeting. It's constantly changing. And that was the big takeaway from this competition for me, was just to watch all of these emotions and sensations change. And this comes directly from sort of like my renewed emphasis on having a mindfulness practice and a meditation practice. None of these things are permanent. They change, and we can move with them or we can resist them. Resisting them is futile. My opponent and I are the same sides of a single coin. There is no enemy without a friend. There is no victory without defeat. We're really talking about the same thing. Victory does not exist without defeat. An enemy does not exist without a friend. You take one away and they vanish. It's just straight from Alan Watts and the exploration and explanation of non-duality. And then the last bit, how few of us can truly be great? Does that mean we stop striving? We can all be great strivers. We can all embody that quality. This is something like I've wrestled with for a long time, because throughout my athletic career, such as it is, I've been surrounded. I've always been in the middle, and there's nothing worse in my mind than, like, from a self-judgment standpoint, there's nothing worse than mediocrity. You know, I'm constantly saying to myself, well, what can I do better? What can I do differently? What can I do to break into that upper echelon? I'm still pushing very hard to, like, be a gold medalist. I really want to win Masters someday. Might be when I'm 80, but, like, I'm determined to get there. I don't know if I ever will. It's totally outside of, I shouldn't say totally, but much of it is outside of my control, as we talked about sort of in the heart of this episode. But what is inside of my control is to be a great striver, to walk the path with quality, to embody that quality for my son and my students, and to do it for its own sake, not to do it for any extrinsic reasons, but to do it because it is right and good with a capital R and a capital G. So that's all I've got for you this week. Take 2 on the podcast. Hopefully the correct microphone is recording. I checked it before I pressed record, but that doesn't guarantee anything. As always, the new website is up, bjjmeditations.com. That's where you can book an in-person coaching session with me. That's the best way to support me. That's also the best way to put everything I'm talking about here into practice. Beyond that, you can make a donation on the website too, via Venmo, if you would like to offset production costs of the podcast. You can read these essays that underpin BJJ Meditations, and you could sign up for the mailing list, which will launch this week. I'm leaning toward doing it on Substack. Also, check out the highest levels on BJJ Mental Models Premium. You can sign up for a free trial of that on BJJ Mental Models. That's where Emily Kwok and I unpack a lot of the principles and tactics that we work with clients in, that we work on with clients in our peak performance consultancy with Josh Waitskin. If you want to sponsor BJJ Meditations, that'd be dope, especially if you work for Kekoa Collective or Show Your Roll. 2 brands that I'm very fond of. If you want to sponsor the podcast, you can email me at bjjmeditations@gmail.com. Please like, subscribe, review, and share. Please follow us on Instagram, BJJ_meditations, and also come train at Princeton Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Any and all affiliations and academies welcome. Wear whatever gi you want as long as it's clean. Wear whatever rash guard you want as long as it's clean. We are running the 47 challenge indefinitely, $70 for 4 classes and a free gi. Complete the challenge successfully. That's completing 4 classes. We'll take $70 off your first membership. That's for brand new grapplers. For experienced and brand new grapplers, we always offer a 0 obligation 2 class free trial. Come check us out. Try before you buy. No high pressure sales pitches, none of that crap. If you're training at a place where they do that, you might want to investigate your options elsewhere. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Really great to talk to you. Really great to be back on the mat. And I will talk to you next week.